Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national television channel about India's foreign policy, India's international relations, India's key strategic partnerships around the world, and how India is involved in shaping regimes and institutions to make a better planet. Viewers, in this episode, we are looking at the phenomenon of personal chemistry between world leaders and how it impacts on foreign policy, with special reference to the unique friendship diplomacy of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And to discuss this, I'm greatly privileged to introduce you to our distinguished guest, Ambassador Harsh Vardhan Shringla. Harsh Vardhan Shringla ji was India's Foreign Secretary, which is the highest position in the Indian Foreign Service system. He was India's ambassador to the United States and to Thailand, and High Commissioner to Bangladesh, and most recently he was the chief coordinator for India's very successful G20 presidency in 2023. Shringla ji, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Mr. Chaulia, namaskar. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you, sir. To begin with, you have been a practitioner of diplomacy for so many decades and have seen Indian leaders engaging with their peers, prime ministers, presidents all over the world. But the Modi era from 2014 onwards has been quite special in this regard, and you have witnessed it yourself. So I'd request you to start by reflecting as a practitioner of diplomacy on how important this phenomenon is, how the chemistry or the friendship between world leaders matters, because often we tend to think that ultimately it is the convergence or the alignment of interests that really matter in bilateral or multilateral settings. But we have seen in the Modi era that this has become a big plus factor for our diplomacy. So if you could start by with your thoughts on how important you think this personal chemistry is, sir.
Well, when you talk about relationships between states or between countries, then the most visible manifestation of that relationship is the relationship between leaders. When you see two leaders shake hands, when you see two leaders greet each other, you think that the countries involved. So the leaders really represent the countries, and that reflects on the relationship between countries. Henry Kissinger, once described personal chemistry as one of the most important aspects. He says that leaders, they meet, they speak on philosophical terms, but officials take the cue and take that relationship forward based on what the leaders are, the sort of connect between the leaders. So from that point of view, I think the relationship between two countries is to a large extent determined by how the leaders of those countries relate to each other, they interact with each other, and what their own personal connect is. And in that context, as you pointed out, I think Prime Minister Modi has really understood the importance of a personal chemistry or a personal relationship with his counterparts. He has, acted on it, and he has definitely looked at this as a way of taking relationships forward. So whether it is the United States, whether it's Japan, Australia, or our neighborhood, I think you will see, or any part of the world, Prime Minister Modi has utilized his personal charisma, his outreach, his ability to relate to his counterparts, to take India's interests, our national interests, our important goals when it comes to relations with these countries significantly forward.
Right, and you mentioned that when the leaders talk, it's at the more generic level, the philosophical level, and then the bureaucracy gets to work and implements the nitty-gritty of the foreign policies and the cooperation between countries. Now, when you look at Prime Minister Modi, I mean, you have to give it to him that there's something about his own personality which is very gregarious and very affectionate towards others, and he builds friendships, right? Friendship is a gift that not every leader naturally has, but he has it. I think his rise as a politician within India in the domestic sphere also, the kind of camaraderie and the likability factor for Mr. Modi is tremendous. So on that count, you have worked under him both when you were ambassador to the US and foreign secretary, and then heading the G20 G20 process. So please tell our audiences what is unique about his persona that makes him so affable and so likable as an individual. You know, we can go into the deeper structural aspects later, but let's focus a bit on him and why he brings this X factor to our diplomacy.
So what I said was that Henry Kissinger described, leaders speaking to each other in philosophical terms. I think that does not apply to the current era, and especially not to Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi's interactions are substance-oriented, and I think, beyond the bonhomie, you would see that his discussions are very, very substantive. They're very focused, and they're very result-oriented. And when you talk about his own personal chemistry, I think it is true that his charisma, his charm, his ability to connect with people, whether they're from large countries, small countries, developed countries, developing countries, irrespective, I think is something that I think should be a subject of a detailed study, because this is a connect which I think has been very unique, and which he has really taken to a level that has not been seen in international diplomacy before. I mean, whether he has, if you look at the United States, he has had an excellent connect with President Obama. He had an absolutely fantastic rapport with President Trump, and he has a great relationship with President Biden. So irrespective of ideologies in the United States, parties that they represent, I think his connect with the leaders in the US has been absolutely phenomenal, and that has dictated to a large extent the relationship that exists today between our two. So similarly, if you look at Africa, whether it is President Philip Nyerere of Mozambique, whether it is President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, whether it is any of the leaders in Africa, the connect is very strong. Kenya, Tanzania, West Africa, South Africa, I think all of the leadership in Africa, Prime Minister Modi is able to connect with them in a way that no Prime Minister in the past has been able to do that. But the connect is one part, it is his uniqueness, his ability to warmly greet people, his ability to use our traditional concept of Atithi Devo Bhava. You saw in the G20, whether it was a G20 meeting or whether it was a summit, the level of welcome and reception that was accorded to our guests was again incredible, and it represented incredible India. But it's also part of our ethos, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. When we talk about world as one family, we also in our interactions engage others in that manner. So Prime Minister Modi's engagement with world leaders is a reflection of our traditional ethos. It is a reflection of his own, I would say, approach to matters that are both domestic and global in nature. After all, it is under Prime Minister Modi that the concept of a human-centric globalization was first discussed and first, I would say, invoked. The world understands that India is a different country. It is a country that is working for the global common good. It is a country that does not meddle into the internal affairs of other states. It is a country that does not lead countries into indebtedness. It is really a country that is working in the best let's say, sense of the ideology of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And that's what the Prime Minister represents. Everything he does is within that ethos of our country and taking our national interests and our national objectives forward.
Absolutely, sir. So yes, it reflects our deep civilizational values, and he is a symbol of that in many ways, Prime Minister Modi. Shringla ji, talking about our major relationships, you already mentioned the US, the manner in which Prime Minister has straddled so many administrations, and if there is a change of regime in the US again in 2025, I'm sure he will again work with whoever is in power. So that way, it seems to me that he and our Ministry of External Affairs have a clear sense of who are our main strategic partners, and I think even the personal chemistry, he invests a lot more in those relationships, right? So in that sense, while he is friendly with the whole range of countries and with leaders, and you mentioned many, when it comes to our top strategic partners, he really invests in this friendship with the at the summit level, isn't it? And if you talk of Japan, and again that's another major country for us. You mentioned this, the kind of what was called bromance between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the late Shinzo Abe, was legendary. And even after the great Abe passed, with Fumio Kishida, the current Japanese Prime Minister, again, Prime Ministers built this very, very tight bond. So, could you tell us about these major other bilateral relations? We are seeing with Australia also, be it Scott Morrison or Anthony Albanese, right or left, whoever comes to power, Prime Minister Modi goes out of the way to embrace these leaders, and to, this hugging and, hand holding, it has a strategic purpose behind it, right? It's apart from just PM's personality of being friendly and developing friendships, it's also an investment in major relationships, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think wherever you've had a strong partnership that has developed, whether it's, as you mentioned, with Japan, with Australia, with the Gulf, I think our relationship has changed significantly there. With Europe, I mean, in a certain good example is the Scandinavian countries, where we have a strong green connect because of that personal relationship. Latin America, a new relationship developing. Everywhere, I think that personal connect has made the difference. You mentioned Australia. It was, I think, in 2015 when the Prime Minister had first gone and addressed the Australian Parliament. Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister used a colloquial Australian term. He talked about shirts front. Shirts front when in referring to the fact that Tony Abbott had three heads of state or government addressing their parliament in a short period of time, and he said, this is what he's done. He's done a shirts front with you, which means he's knocked you down with his absolute ability to connecting with the Australian Parliament. But what it did was that it connected Prime Minister Modi to the Australian Parliament and the Australian people. So whether it's Tony Abbott, whether it's Scott Morrison, with whom he had an outstanding relationship, or the present Prime Minister, as you said, Albanese, our relationship with Australia has taken that qualitative leap forward. And I'll give you one example of Scott Morrison and the relationship. As you know, Scott Morrison, was very, very openly affectionate towards Prime Minister Modi. He spoke about, culinary skills. He also, attribute a lot of initiatives correctly to Prime Minister Modi, including calling for a summit of the G20 for COVID to deal with the COVID crisis. But I think we would not have got our first FTA, a free trade agreement with Australia, had it not been that connect between the two Prime Ministers. Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, saw to it personally that the first FTA we concluded in recent years was with Australia, and today I think that relationship is really ready to take off in economic terms. That FTA has done wonders for both our countries. Similarly, if you look at the connect he had, with leaders across the board, let me tell you a personal instance about Sheikh Hasina, because relationships are developed; they don't happen naturally. And when I was in Bangladesh, I did recommend. I said it would be great if, and it would have a significant impact on public opinion in Bangladesh if Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was visiting India at that time, 2017, was to be received, at the airport at a high level. And that same day, I was in Delhi and I was told that Prime Minister Modi would receive Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, but that we should keep it a secret. And when Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina came down her aircraft, it was incredible because Prime Minister Modi was there to receive her, and this was an unprecedented step. It also symbolized not only his personal, mutual respect that the two prime ministers had for each other, but also I think the state of our relationship with Prime Minister Modi at that time referred to as Shonali Adhyay. That is when the term was coined, a golden chapter in relationship. And those 250 people who came out of that aircraft were so, I would say, absolutely positively taken aback that it took Prime Minister Modi more than half an hour to extricate himself from that, those seekers of selfies, etc. What I'm trying to say is that the Prime Minister invests in relationship. He understands the importance of these relationships, and he gets the best of the relationship because the chemistry develops with the leader, and that's the point you was talking about all along. I mean, any sort of good relationship today. Look at the Gulf. Look at UAE. Yeah. Prime Minister Modi's relationship with Sultan Mohammed bin Zayed has been the turning point. I mean, it's led to our FTA with UAE. We've signed the I2U2, which is India, Israel, UAE, and the United States. We are also there as with the Gulf as part of the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, one of the most significant diplomatic initiatives taken by any Prime Minister in India. Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Sultan. I think, again, NDS and Prime Minister Modi enjoy an absolutely outstanding relationship. And I think from that point of view, those are the relationships that have made the difference, because today, India in the Gulf is regarded totally differently as what it was 10 years ago. Today, we are really, a country that is on the move, and we are working with them across the board. Technology, defense, people to people, everywhere. I mean, the first Indian temple was inaugurated in Abu Dhabi. And I think that was an incredible, I would say, first, because you could never imagine that, a Hindu temple would come up in the Gulf region. But again, it is that chemistry, it is that connect that has, led to that confidence that, Indians, are those who are contributing to that economy. And that relationship with India is one that has been nurtured, whether it's in investment terms, in technology terms. India is a partner and a country that we can go with. So that's what it amounts to.
Yeah. Shringla, the Prime Minister himself once said that, this personal chemistry is like, the force that nurtures the tree based on trust. And Vishwas in Hindi, he said, and trust is everything in international relations. That is the term Prime Minister used, and he has been saying that this Sabka Vishwas, everybody's trust, is not only a domestic slogan or a motto, but also for to guide our foreign policy. And External Affairs Minister Dr. Subramanian Jaishankar also has been emphasizing the trust factor as very critical for India's rise and for our major strategic partnerships, and to make the international environment more favorable to enable India to keep marching towards this leading power status. So could you reflect a bit on this trust factor and how it is linked to this personal chemistry and the friendship diplomacy we are talking about, and why is this becoming more important today, especially with the world becoming polarized into multiple camps? How important is this trust, and how are we able to build this reservoir of trust and goodwill across the world?
You're very right, Professor Chaulia. I think trust is a very important factor in today's, diplomacy. Just to give you one illustration, during the COVID period, we saw that many of our supply lines were severely threatened. Many of the very important ingredients that went into our industry, that made pharmaceuticals, that made PPE kits, masks, etc., equipment needed to combat COVID-19 pandemic, was not easily available, and countries were really jostling to get whatever sources of supply were there. And we at that time, thought of the concept of developing our own capacities. And if you remember, Prime Minister Modi came up with the Atmanirbhar Bharat policy, and we developed, and we are now developing and strengthening our capacities, whether it's in semiconductors, whether it's in active pharmaceutical ingredients. We are strengthening our own capacity to deal with this. And we're also working with trusted partners. So it's not a coincidence that our first free trade agreement was with Australia. We then signed with the UAE. We're negotiating with the EU, with the UK, with Israel, a number of partners with whom we are working on free trade agreements. But these are trusted partners. And where does the trust come from? The trust begins at the level of the Prime Minister. Here is a country that is looking at India, and he says, I can trust Prime Minister Modi, I can trust that country, I can trust India. So that's what it amounts to. That trust factor is critical in enabling you to develop special relationships, in enabling our country to get those access to resources, access to markets, access to technology in a way that we've never managed before. Look at the United States. Today, we are one of the recipients of, one of the largest recipients of US investments, US technology. We have signed, when Prime Minister Modi went to the US in 2023, the initiative on critical and emerging technologies that will get us access to cutting edge technologies from the United States. I think our industry will benefit greatly from this. Our startups are being funded greatly by venture capitalists from the US. And I think our economy is moving on account of many of these relationships that have been developed, starting from that trust factor. So that's where it comes from. That is the first level at which, when you act as a common citizen on the ground, you are doing business, you're traveling abroad, you're a skilled worker, you have to go on tourism, you have to strike some deals. This is where it makes a difference. I mean, today India is regarded completely differently from what we regarded, a decade and a half ago. Today, India is seen as a country of technologies. India is seen as a growing power. India is seen as a trusted friend across the world, across the global south, because the Prime Minister's initiative to connect with leaders of the global south, to the voice of global south on a number of occasions. We are regarded across the world, as I said, as a trusted partner country that is most welcome with its investments, with its trade. It is a country that is not out to exploit others, it is out to benefit others. And there is a mutuality of benefit that's very unique in today's diplomacy and era of, I would say, conflicts and differences between states.
Absolutely. Shringla ji, there is also the issue of ironing out differences. I mean, sometimes we may have, if not a conflict of interest, some kind of, lack of full convergence, or maybe we are stuck on certain issues at the lower level of the bureaucracy where there are negotiations going on. Sometimes maybe national security concerns, things related to counterterrorism, cooperation, sensitive issues. And there, I suppose, as an observer from outside, I suppose that Prime Minister's chemistry with world leaders can also help us achieve those kind of goals, right, where things are stuck or things are not going the way India wants it to be, and then the PM directly has a conversation or a dialogue with his counterpart in that country or region, and then in a crisis or in the case of a conflict, it also benefits us in those senses. So is there something you would recall from your career, having seen something like this, where we were not 100%, but because of PM's involvement and push and persuasion, soft power, the other country came around?
Absolutely. I think there are many such instances. Take the case of Europe, for example. A very recent example is Italy, where Prime Minister was there for the G7 summit. If you recall, because of certain incidents that happened, our relationship with an important partner in Europe was practically frozen. It's Prime Minister Modi who worked to get that relationship off the ground, took it off that official level where those differences would remain, brought it to the political domain where he is able to make that difference. I was there in his meeting when he had with Prime Minister of Italy at that time. This is during the G20 in Rome in 2021. And I think many of the issues had been ironed out. But today, if you look at his personal connect with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and the fact that that relationship is moving forward at a level that is incredible. Couldn't be envisaged a frozen relationship 10 years ago to today. Our relationship with Italy is completely different. And again, it comes down to personal chemistry and the trust factor. You see, take the example of Turkey, where we had our differences, primarily because of some unwarranted utterances from Turkey from time to time. But, that relationship nonetheless is an important one. And the fact that during its very severe earthquake, India was one of the first to send, a rescue team to send assistance to Turkey at that time, I think was well received at a public level. Again, this is part of the Prime Minister's philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, human-centric globalization. It doesn't matter if we have differences, but when it comes to people and when it comes to humanity, then we must be there to help each other. And that goes into addressing and resolving conflicts, whether it is the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The Prime Minister is constantly in touch with both leaders, President Zelensky and President Putin. Whether it's the Middle East issue, I think the Prime Minister believes that this is not an era of war, as definitely it isn't. And the Prime Minister has, I think, waded into many of these issues in an effort to see how we could help resolving this. Even in our own neighborhood, you take the case of Maldives.
Yes.
Maldives, with the new government coming in, there were some perceptions that they might be anti-Indian in some senses. But Maldives is a close neighbor. It's a very important issue for us. The Prime Minister understood that in inviting President Muizu to his inauguration ceremony for his third term in office. This is a gesture that is not lost on anyone. We are inclusive. We make sure that all our neighbors be there, and that we attached importance with to the relationship with countries. And this is again coming straight, I would say, from the Prime Minister's thinking of a relationship that is based, or relationships that are based on humanity and on the people of our countries involved.
Absolutely. So, viewers, this fascinating discussion with former Indian Foreign Secretary and former G20 Chief Coordinator Harsh Vardhan Shringla ji is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has really invested in key relationships. He reflects our philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, and he really has created a huddle of friends from all over the world who actually enable India's rise and who are helping India reach its desired destination in the Committee of Nations. Let me thank Harsh Vardhan Shringla ji for such valuable insights. Always great learning from you, sir. Thank you so much for being on Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you, Professor, for having me here.
Thank you, sir. So, viewers, personal chemistry matters. Do not think that it is just a photo op or publicity or PR. It's much more than that. Sometimes the media hypes the personal chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and certain leaders, but we have to go beyond the hype. We have to look at the substance. And what we've learned today is that personal chemistry adds to the overall alignment or convergence of interests between India and various countries, and it is in the Modi era that we've been able to maximize the force multiplier effect of personal diplomacy for our foreign policy. Do look deeper into this phenomenon beyond just the media headlines. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.